assess the situation first, and then we kind of strategize how they can improve their cost optimization and also get everyone on board with this strategies. Because as I mentioned, knowing about your company's goals and pain points when it comes to cost optimization really can help align your FinOps practice within the organizations.
Hello and welcome to Cloud Career Mentor. I am your host, Fayomi, and today we have a very special guest, Raphaela Han, who is a FinOps specialist. And today she's going to walk us through what FinOps is, why it's important, and why it drives business value. But before we go into all of that, Rafaela, can you give us a big background on how you got into the cloud and how you got into the FinOps space specifically?
Yes. So my current role is I'm an associate FinOps consultant at Software One. And before I made the transition into tech and FinOps, I have business background, non-traditional tech background degrees. And during the pandemic, I made the transition by going through a DevOps bootcamp program. And afterwards, I worked at the DevOps bootcamp program as a technical trainer. And I also had an internship at a data analytics company. And I just fell into FinOps, kind of a natural transition because it mixes a little bit of business and finance and technology.
No, that's great. That's really interesting to hear that story. And I guess that leads us into the question, what exactly is FinOps?
So if you use ChatGPT, I was asking this while I was preparing for this interview. It gives you a little bit of a different answer, but the official definition of FinOps is a combination of the word finance and DevOps. So what it is, it's a framework that combines cost optimization in cloud and change management practice, meaning you're holding financial accountability across the whole organization. So it's a collaboration effort between finance team, operations team, and engineer team.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting to know because, as anyone who's familiar with, say, the cloud or AWS related principles, one of the pillars there is cost optimization. And so somebody might think, okay, if I know the cost optimization pillar, does that make me FinOps? What do you say is the difference between, say, cost optimization and FinOps?
So yes, well-architected framework, I'm glad you brought it up because it has cost optimization as one pillar, and you would think it's kind of independent from other pillars, but it's all interconnected, right? Operational efficiency. Is it efficiency or excellence? Operational efficiency and performance and reliability, security, sustainability. They're all connected with cost optimization if you think about it. But FinOps framework, it encompasses cost optimization, but it goes beyond that. So you would think when you're thinking about cost optimization, you're thinking about saving the most money, but FinOps isn't about the saving the most money, but creating the most value for your dollars. So you think, oh, maybe that's just a wordplay, right? But if you think about it, you don't want to compromise your performance or quality of your workload in cloud for the sake of saving money, right? What's the point of saving a little bit of money if your app is not going to be accessible? So you have to think about collaboration and communication amongst your teams. So previously, when you think about on-prem environment, usually the finance team and the procurement team and maybe a little bit of IT management a couple times a year will be involved in the budget setting and all that. But now, if you're familiar with cloud, it's very easy to spend a lot of money in cloud immediately, right? If you think about getting a mouse that's like a $10 mouse in a traditional company setting, you have to do a lot of paperwork, right? And you have to go through different departments to get approval and then also wait for the shipment of the mouse. But in cloud, unless you have some kind of governance and policies in place, you can just click away and then next thing you know, you're getting a bill for $10,000 or even more, right? So I think that's where the FinOps practice comes in. It's beyond cost optimization, but also installing that financial accountability amongst everyone that's involved. So finance team, operations team, engineering team, procurement team. You can go on. Yeah.
Are you interested in getting your first cloud job? If you answered yes, then I have a free guide just for you. This free guide walks you through a proven step-by-step process to help you get that first cloud job. It walks you through the 3 simple steps you can take today to make yourself highly employable The link is in the description below, so make sure you download it now if you're interested. All right, let's get back to the show. Yes. And I really like what you said about it's not just about cost optimization, it's about getting value for money. So a quick example I can give people just so they can get their head around this is, let's say you have an RDS database running in AWS, for example, and yeah, you can run just that one database and that'll save you money. But it might actually be better for you to have to run that database as a multi-AZ. So basically have a backup database running parallel. So if the first database fails, it automatically switches over to the second database. So by having two databases running, that could be seen as more expensive, but actually because of the business requirements, that could actually be better value for money. Because if you had the first scenario with only one database, a database went down with no backup, then that actually end up costing the business more money in the long run. And so I guess that's an example of how FinOps is different from just pure cost of optimization. It's taking all these other factors in mind, like scalability and business requirements and things like that. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And you mentioned something about FinOps framework, which I'm really interested to dive into. Can you walk us through what that is and what we can learn from it?
As I mentioned, the FinOps framework, so the leading community force, so to speak, is FinOps Foundation. And you can find the information, I believe it's FinOps.org. And they are a nonprofit organization that's a collaborative effort between different practitioners and consultants and other industry leaders to come up with this framework. And again, it's a mixture of cost optimization and also collaboration, so change management practice within companies. And you can find a lot of different ways to implement FinOps practice within your organization through the community. And I highly recommend. Nowadays there are so many resources, right? And there are a lot of podcasts and a lot of YouTube shows about FinOps. One show that I would recommend is Keys to AWS Optimization by AWS Cloud Financial Management Team. So
Mm.
that's what they call FinOps in AWS, Cloud Financial Management. So the terms are a little bit different. And one project that I wanted to focus on is that if a lot of companies are going multi-cloud nowadays, so if you're familiar with any little bit of billing in any of the cloud, you would notice the terminology is a little bit different. Even if they're the same, they might not mean necessarily the same thing between organizations. So right now what FinOps Foundation is trying to do is they are trying to do this project called Focus. So it is trying to get technical specifications and toolkit to build, maintain an open standard across all different cloud service providers. So that way, something that means one thing in AWS would mean same thing in Azure and also GCP, Google Cloud.
So sort of standardization of
Yeah.
terminology in a way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
No, that's really cool, and I think it's very important to for people to understand how why that framework is important in a way. Could you give us an example of sort of what day to day is like for you? What sort of projects you work on as a sort of FinOps consultant?
So what I do day to day is first, let me just talk about my clients high level, not going into without going into too much into detail. But I work with mostly mid to large size companies, and I take a look at their cloud spend data and the current cultural practice they have within the organization. So some companies already have some sort of a FinOps team, and it's not necessarily people who are just dedicated to FinOps 24/7, but they have other roles in their company, but wear a FinOps hat. So I work with them to kind of go over their cost optimization strategies. And also, well, I start off with a diagnostic, right, to kind of assess the situation first, and then we kind of strategize how they can improve their cost optimization and also get everyone on board with this strategies. Because as I mentioned, I think a lot of companies have higher ups that are very interested in saving money, but when I talk to the engineers or other people who are lower in hierarchy, so to speak, consensus is that they don't see that as an urgency or priority, right? When I talk to engineers off the record, most of the time, they would say, well, that's not my job they don't really care about it. But I think that's the biggest challenge that I'm facing as a consultant. But what we try to tell the people in the company is that having this financial accountability across the organization would be just the better goal for the entire organization. And also, I think eventually the higher ups, even if they're not taking a look at all these cloud bills right now and not really holding their engineers accountable, eventually they will, because I think a lot of managers love to hear that they're saving money, right, in cloud, and they want to know why money. Right now, the biggest misunderstanding, and this is what I've been getting from clients and other people in the industry as well, is that when they think about going to cloud, they would automatically save money, but they don't think about the
Mm,
work that's involved in having their cost optimization. Um, and a lot of, and you probably seen some cases too, right? When some companies realize they're not necessarily saving that much money by going on cloud, but they go back to on-prem. And that's some kind of little
yes.
mini trend that we're seeing. And the problem is because people are thinking about it in the traditional business model, where you have to think about the cost
Mm,
of the data centers that you already have established as an on-prem company. So you can't just do lift and shift, meaning you can't just take the existing infrastructure on-prem and then just have that directly translated into cloud, but you have to modernize it. Also think about the native cloud tooling and services they have available, to create this new business and technological model to fit into the new cloud technology.
yes, I definitely agree. And I've seen a lot of different examples where companies can be really wasteful with their spend. So, for example, I heard the story of this company and their sort of dev account, or not even production. This is just their sort of sandbox account was costing $90,000 every month. And this is an account that, it's not running any production workloads, and it happens so easily, A dev is doing a test, they turn on a massive database, they finish the test and move on to something else and forget to turn that database off. And, these resources sort of accumulate over time. And if there's no visibility as to what's running, why it's running, if there are no regular reviews and no accountability, like you mentioned, it can be really easy for the cost to spiral. And also combined with the fact that if people don't have good cost optimization strategies, then again, they might, or if they don't understand how the cloud works, how the billing works, then yeah, again, the problems come into play. And I think that actually leads us nicely into what strategies should companies employ to keep their costs down? And I'm sure you can tell us from, how they can even gain greater visibility to it, to how they can implement processes that makes it easier for them to keep an eye on their costs and accountability.
So yes, there are different strategies obviously you can implement, and I'll just give you some top ones that we recommend to most clients. I'm glad you mentioned sandbox and development environment, because a lot of companies just have it run 24/7 unnecessarily. And nowadays it's a little bit more tricky because a lot of companies are global, and when it's global, even if the US time zone, well, because I'm based in the USA, when the US time zone for work hours ends, somewhere else is they're starting their work time. So it's a little bit tricky, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to run 24/7, especially on the weekends, right? So you have to think about the
Mm,
basic principle of turning things off when you're not using them within a reason, right? So you have to kind of automate the process of turning off certain non critical workload and just dev environment as well. And another strategy that you can implement is spot instances. I've seen some companies, and I haven't seen that they're not clients, so I've been told about this, but some companies run 80 to 90% of their workload on spot. I don't know how they manage, but they can save tons of money by doing that. And if you're not familiar with spot instances, what it is that you get the biggest discount, more than reserved instances and savings plans on AWS or even Azure and GCP as well, is that you put your interruptible, non-critical workload into those instances. So that way you can kind of have it run as long as the threshold is not met. And then when it's interrupted and turned off, it's still okay. It doesn't affect your entire workloads. So that's one really, really top cost saving strategy that companies can implement, but it's not, obviously it's not for everyone. So the more common cost optimization strategy that I can recommend is obviously the reserved instances and savings plans. So it depends on your more predictable workload. So if you know you're going to have more traffic or more spikes in your workload and you're going to need it consistently, then I recommend that you purchase 1 year or 3 year plans with a reserved instances or savings plans, that so that way you can maximize your savings in cloud and have that capacity in cloud all the time. And some other ones I can recommend in terms of visibility, that helps with accountability, is that raising awareness of this data that exists within cloud. And how to do it is one really, really important strategy that a lot of organizations miss, a lot of companies miss, is tagging strategy, right? A lot of companies have some kind of tagging practice in place, but they don't necessarily implement it correctly, or they don't really monitor it. And tagging is very important because when you're trying to figure out who spent what in cloud or what these resources are for, it's not just 10 resources you're looking at, right? It can be thousands, and if not, tens of thousands of resources. So it can get really complicated, and having tagging strategy in place can kind of simplify it, and making sure everything is in accordance of those policies and governance can really help with raising accountability within your cloud environment.
Mm.
And again, having the visibility into cloud. So when you look at native tools in AWS and Azure, something like AWS Cost Explorer, Trusted Advisor, and AWS Advisor, etc. So whenever I talk to clients, when I ask them, do you know about this data, or like how much your cloud spend is? Oftentimes the management or the finance team would say, yeah, we have access to that. The engineers know that it exists somewhere vaguely, but they would never take a look at it, right? So it's like it's there, but what's the point of having resource if you're not going to use it? So having that visibility and awareness of what your spend is going to dramatically help you stay accountable for your own spend. It doesn't necessarily have to be on an individual level, meaning like the engineers do not have to know what their monthly spend was, but it can be by the projects, by the teams, or whatever silo that works for the organization. And having the visibility of how much you spent, how much your team spent, would really help with accountability. It's kind of like having, what do you call that? When you're going on a shopping and then you keep a book of expenses. But it's kind of similar to that, right? If you think about it simply in a personal, at a personal level, kind of taking a look at what you were spending money on, it kind of makes you realize, okay, so I could have saved money here, and this was not necessary kind of business, right? So I think having the visibility and awareness of it would really help with implementing this better cultural practice within the company.
Yeah, I think that that makes complete sense. And obviously, with most companies, there's companies at different scales. So you have smaller companies, medium companies, and like, huge enterprise, and their sort of level of visibility or what actions they're going to take are different. And so if I speak to something like a smaller to mid-range company, what I usually recommend is to conduct regular, well-architected
Mm.
reviews or cost optimization review. So that could be every month, every quarter, every year. So having a regular cadence where you're always keeping an eye on it. And, so that involves maybe sitting with the head of infrastructure or with the devs team. And, depending on how big your bill is, almost going through the bill line by line. Okay, what is this resource? Do we need it? Do we not? And that way, and that starts to build a culture of accountability, because it becomes more top of mind, right? If a developer left a huge database running and it's costing £1,000 a month, and you point that out to them, they're going to realize that, oh, someone's actually keeping an eye on this and it's actually important. So having that regular cadence is very important. And, in larger companies, that could be, using more automated tools like, dashboards and reports. But I think just having that visibility regularly is super important. Like you mentioned, there's strategies that can be used to mitigate. So, for example, stopping instances that aren't in use, or you mentioned automating the stopping starting. So, for the people in my Cloud Career Mentor program, we have a project where we create something like this, right? So we use a combination of CloudWatch events and AWS Lambdas and tagging. So we have some EC2 instance tagged as dev and some tagged as prod. And then we schedule an event where, 5 p.m. every day, it finds all the dev instances and turns them off. At 9 a.m., it turns them on. And on the weekend, it turns them off. So especially for those looking for projects, that's a really cool project to begin implementing some cost saving practices. And you've mentioned things like reserved instances. Those are really powerful because if you have a workload that's consistent all the time and it's not going to change, you could reserve those. And those, I think you can have between like 10 and 25% savings, depending on the options you choose there. But one thing that's really critical actually is that before instances are reserved, and I guess this is where a big part of FinOps comes in, is to actually understand the resource usage, right? So for example, if you have an EC2 instance that's, you look at the metrics and you see, oh, it's only using 5% of its CPU and 10% of its memory, and you can see that usage is consistent and constant, it might be worth downsizing that instance because it's not using its full capacity. So by reducing the instance size, you actually save a lot more money and you become more efficient. And after you do that, you can then reserve that instance, and that way you're getting double the savings, right? So those are just some strategies. Did you have anything else you want to add, Rafaela?
Yeah.
Some other
Yeah. Good thing
strategies
that
come
you
to mind.
reminded me. I mean, that's a big thing that I forgot to mention. But yeah, when you said downsizing, so the term that we use in FinOps is right sizing. Obviously, going back to the previous model of being on-prem, even if you just needed 10 units out of 100, you have to buy 100 units, let's say, because that's how it comes, right? But in cloud, if you just need 10 units, you can just only buy 10 units instead of 100. And so when companies are trying to do lift and shift, they need to be really mindful of what they're committing to, because you don't need the extra 90 units, so to speak, when you're moving to cloud. You can just commit to whatever you need. And if you need more, you can purchase them later or as you're needed. So I think that having the right sizing strategy is very important. And also constant monitoring is important. You mentioned having the regular cadence is very important. Yes, going back to the traditional model, people and finance team, they would not be having this budget monitoring and forecasting as often. But now that in cloud, sometimes there can be some unexpected spikes. And again, because the spending is so easy in cloud, you have to constantly keep an eye on what is going on in your cloud, whether it's expected or unexpected, right? Have some kind of thresholds and alerts and alarms in place, so that way you can keep an eye on unexpected spikes or anomalies, so that way that your the integrity of your system and infrastructure is not compromised and optimized as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point to highlight as well, because having alerts is so important. And just to expand on that, just so people are a bit clearer, let's say that your AWS bill monthly is about $5,000, give or take. So what you can do is that you can set an alert for $5,000, or maybe a bit more than that, maybe $6,000, just to give some wiggle room. And so if your bill actually gets to $6,000, you get an alert because it's higher than what the usual is. So you might want to look into that. But even to add on top of that, you could actually set thresholds around that. So you could say, if it's 80% of the way to $6,000, let me know. So you can preemptively start assessing what's going on even before it hits that threshold. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do around alerting, around budgeting, and yeah, that's a really, really valid point.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own AWS personal account that I use for my own projects, and I set my alerts, my thresholds really low to make sure that I'm not going over budget, because sometimes I forget to turn off certain things. I know it's bad practice when
Yeah.
I'm doing my personal projects. So, and the next thing I know, I'm getting alerts in my phone and my email. So yeah, I think it's definitely, and if you're in a bigger enterprise environment, those can cost far more than what it can cost me in my personal account. So yes, definitely keep an eye on
Yeah.
usage.
That's so important. That's it. In fact, anyone who's setting up their AWS account, one of the first thing you need to do is set up a budget alert, because that will save you a lot of money in the long run. And yeah, for enterprises as well, the last thing you want is a surprise $100,000 bill because, someone turned something on and you weren't aware. So that's a really, really valid point. Thanks for sharing. What value do you think FinOps brings to organizations?
It's a growing field, I would say, because I think more companies are migrating their workload into cloud, and they are realizing it's not necessarily the cheaper option they were promised if they're not doing it right. Right. So a lot of companies, the trend that I'm seeing is that they want to make sure that they're optimizing their infrastructure and cloud spend as they're moving, rather than have everything on board and then trying to figure out the cost optimization later. And so I think just being aware of certain native tools and even third party tools that are available to help you manage these cost optimization strategies would really help set you apart from the industry standard. And well, not industry standard, I would say, but like the mass, right? And knowing about your company's goals and pain points when it comes to cost optimization really help align your FinOps practice within the organization. So I think there isn't like a no one size fits all solution, FinOps solution for everyone. But I think everyone can benefit from it because it is about optimizing your cloud. It's not just about cost optimization, but going back to well architected framework pillars, everything is related. So cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, security, reliability, sustainability. It's all interconnected with cost optimization if you think about it, right? Like if there's a security breach, the cost it can be quite costly, right? If you haven't seen on the news, there's always cybersecurity somewhere, and it's costing companies millions, if not billions of dollars. So you definitely want to have everything, or the guardrails in place, and cost optimization and FinOps is kind of in all these different pillars. So that way that you can if you keep an eye on one thing, it's all interconnected. So I think having that awareness of FinOps can really help the organization improve their class settings.
Yeah. No, that's really important. And it's actually the same as being a solutions
Right.
architect. So a lot of the time, people don't realize that being a solutions architect and designing infrastructure, it's all about the business requirements, right? Like you say, there's no one right or wrong answer. So for example, for one company, going completely serverless with Lambdas, that'll save them a lot of money. And that's the good way to go because they have the technical team in place, they have everything they need. But for another company, actually just having EC2s in an auto-scaling group is the way to go. And so, yeah, understanding what the business requirements are, what their pain points are, what their priorities are, this helps shapes their strategy, be it FinOps or be it something else. So I think, yeah, understanding the business is super important in making decisions. So thanks for sharing. So I know you've been in the FinOps role for a while now. What advice would you give to someone who's looking to enter into that field? What do you think they need to learn? What's important? Yeah, just share what you've observed.
I think enter FinOps, you kind of have to know the basics of cloud. It's kind of hard. I think a lot of people in FinOps currently are coming from more business finance background, but it always helps to have the technical knowledge, right? Because sometimes you might be telling engineers this is what you should be doing, and then engineers might push back saying that's not possible technically, right? So you want to have that balance of finance or business and technical aspects. So one, I think this is not just for the FinOps practitioners or professionals, but for everyone in tech, you have to keep up with the latest technology. So I'm sure if you're familiar with cloud computing, you've seen a lot of announcements from reInvent. I think it was 2 weeks ago now, there are a lot of new services and products being announced every couple of months. So you want to know what's the best optimized solutions or technology that's available right now. So keeping up with the latest technology is one thing. And going back to the FinOps Foundation website, FinOps.org, that is where you get most of the FinOps foundational knowledge. So it's a free website, so you can take some paid courses as well, but there are a lot of free resources available out there. So I really recommend that you start from there. And again, talking to your company about their goals, their business goals and pain points and what kind of KPIs they have, having awareness of that is very important because you mentioned going serverless and whatnot. And one example that I can think of from several months ago was Amazon Prime Video going back to monolithic infrastructure, and it ended up saving them, I think, about even 90%, because you would think that serverless is the cheapest option there is, right? And you only pay for what's being used and all that, but you have to consider other factors like how much dependencies there are and whether other types of infrastructures are more suitable for your workload. So just having the technical knowledge of what works for your workload, what works for your project, what works for your company, and aligning with the business goals of your company would be very helpful.
Yes, I totally agree. And just to summarize those points for those who are listening, one, get your cloud fundamentals. So understand technically how things work so you can have conversations with developers or DevOps people and you know what's possible. Two, find out what's happening. So it's good to have a base of the fundamentals and to have some projects under your belt, but you also need to keep learning, right? You need to, keep up to date as to what new technologies have been released, do they apply to your workloads. Three, get on the FinOps website and, learn more about, the frameworks and what's important and what's not. And the final thing I believe you mentioned was understand the business requirements. And this is probably the place I see a lot of technical people fall down, because a lot of the times they're really eager to apply the latest thing. Okay, they want to do Kubernetes, they want to do Lambda, they want to do all this use all these cool technologies. But if that doesn't serve the business needs, all that does is adds more
Right.
complexity, potentially adds more costs, adds more operational overhead. So, as technical people, we need to bear in mind that all our solutions and our recommendations should always line up with the business requirements and priorities, because we're actually just solving business problems and the technology is just the avenue in which we do it. So I just thought it'd be good to clarify that as well for people. Thanks for coming on, Rafaela. I think you've given a lot of value. I think you've shed a lot of light into what FinOps is and how it works. If people want to get in touch with you to find out more, where would you like to point them?
I am on LinkedIn primarily, so my LinkedIn is just my name, Raphaela Han. So yeah, that's one way to get in touch with me. If you want to learn a little bit more about FinOps or what I do, feel free to send me a DM and I'll follow up.
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes as well. Thanks a lot for joining the call, and yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.